This is the Whip Mix Xcavator automatic divesting unit. We're going to show you how to unpack the unit, set it up, and do some simple maintenance and troubleshooting procedures. We're going to unpack the unit now. Before you do that, set it on a good, solid, stable surface like the floor, and then we'll open the box and remove the unit. You'll notice that inside the box there is an illustrated quick start guide, which will take you step by step through the setup and initial running of the unit. There's also an operator's manual in the box. Next, we're going to tilt the box up so that you don't have to reach into the box and strain your back removing the unit. We're going to just tilt it up on its end so that we can slide the whole assembly out for easy access. Next, as we remove the pieces of packing material, etc., from the unit, we're going to use the carton that the unit came in to help us save the pieces in case the unit ever needs to be serviced at the factory again. So that it's important to hang on to those cut foam pieces. In your accessory box, you'll find the following items: an AC power main line cord, and a clean out brush, what we call a hot rock, which is a heater that you would put in your bead bucket to keep moisture from building up in the bead bucket. This is your 200-gram ring chuck and your 100-gram ring chuck. If for any reason you don't find these items in your accessory box, please contact Whip Mix and we'll get you a replacement. Okay, also shipped with your order is a 50-pound bucket of Whip Mix branded beads. These beads have been exhaustively tested with the excavator unit and are guaranteed to work under normal conditions. They're 50 micron glass beads, and now I'm going to demonstrate insertion of the hot rock into the bead bucket. Just push it down in until it's basically fully submerged, only the cord is protruding. And you want to have this in here 12 to 18 hours in advance of using the unit for the first time so that the beads have a chance to warm up and get about 10 degrees or so above ambient temperature. This will prevent moisture buildup in the bead bucket. Okay, let's just take a tour of the back of the unit quickly. This is the air regulator assembly, and this inlet right here is the place where the wall supply air is connected to furnish air to the unit. This is the exhaust port of the unit. This would go back to your either central vacuum or to your standalone vacuum. And then this is your power inlet here and your power on-off switch here. What I'm holding in my hand is the wall air supply source. Depending upon what type of source you have in your installation, the goal is to get from naturally from here into this 1/8 MPT air input. In this particular instance, this is a quick disconnect fitting. There is a mating disconnect fitting here, and in addition to that, this adapts down to a 1/4 MPT and ultimately to a 1/8 MPT. These fittings can be found at your local supply house. The worst case situation, if you're unable to decide the fittings that can go in here, if you take an example of your wall supply fitting and tell them that you need to mate up into a 1/8 NPT female fitting on the air regulator, they can assemble the adapters for you that will get you from point A to point B. What I'm doing now is placing Teflon tape, also available at any local supply house, your Lowe's or your Home Depot, and putting the Teflon tape on the threads of the fitting. Just a simple wrap, or perhaps 2 at the most, and then it'll just pull apart, is essential to ensure that no air leaks develop in the air supply. You want to be careful not to get the tape in front of this because debris can and shards can get into the system and plug things up. So this is a properly taped joint. Next, we're going to insert the taped fitting into the inlet of the air regulator assembly. I'm going to thread it up by hand, and then we're going to take a wrench, probably an open-end wrench or a crescent wrench, and we're going to go ahead and tighten this up. You may have to reach and support the air regulator with the hand under here while you're tightening this in order to prevent bending the bracket here. Now I'm going to connect the air supply. I'm going to support the air regulator and push on the quick disconnect fitting until it snaps. We next need to adjust the air pressure level. The target is 35 pounds per square inch, which is about here. However, there will be some drop when the unit fires up, so I'm going to ask you to adjust the pressure to about 38, which is 2 minor notches before the 40, and then push the knob down. Okay, next we're going to hook the vacuum hose up to the exhaust port. This vacuum hose is also available at your local building supply store, vacuum cleaner supply. It's a 1.5 inch opening here, so if you need to purchase some tubing, just ask for 1.5 inch. It's just simply placed over the flange. This one is a tight enough fit where it will stay on its own, but you might also desire to put a hose clamp over this and tighten it down on the flange more securely. Okay, the next step is to plug the AC power mains cord into the back of the unit. If you wish at this time, you can turn the power switch on. You will notice that a thumping sound will result when I turn the power switch on. This thumping is entirely normal. It is the unit calibrating its swing arm position. Okay, we've turned the unit back around and we have the power on. This particular unit is hooked up to a bench type vacuum unit, which is not turned on currently, so the vacuum fault light is blinking. This is a normal situation whenever the vacuum is off. If you have a centralized vacuum point, then the vacuum light fault light will be extinguished as the vacuum is already on. Next, we're going to go over the various controls of the unit. The knob over here is your depth of cut control. The numbers increase clockwise, and the higher the number, the deeper it will cut into the investment mold. The two buttons on the upper echelon of the control panel here are for cutting cool rings, investment molds that have already cooled down. The echelon below that is for delayed cutting for hot rings. And just a point there, if you put a hot ring into the unit, if it's a 100-gram unit, you press this lower left button and you will get a time delay which will allow initial cooling for the ring, and then the unit will automatically start up and divest. When the cycle is complete, the unit will beep and the swing arm will park, and the ready light will come back on. While the cycle is running, the red running light will be lit, indicating the cycle in progress. The same is true for the 200-gram investment mold size. This is the cool ring button, and this is the hot ring button. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to fill the bead reservoir. Before we do, however, we want to make certain that we place the sieve or strainer, which is a fine mesh filter, over the rim of the jar, and then we're going to go ahead and pour our beads through the filter. Notice the fine sheeting action of the beads as they flow through the strainer, and that the beads are not stacking up for any length of time inside the strainer. If they puddle up inside the strainer and don't flow through unassisted, for more than 5 seconds, then that indicates that the moisture content of the beads is high and that there could be issues, transport issues of the beads through the system. Okay, once the jar is filled to the desired level, and then there is a scribe line on the outside of the jar here that you can see, which is the maximum fill line. You should avoid filling the jar any fuller than that. The reason for that is that beads can get over the top of this standpipe and clog that up. The next thing that I'm going to do that's important is to take and wipe the rim of the jar with my finger to get any beads. There's a little groove in the top of this jar. I'm going to wipe those out. This will save a lot of maintenance associated with the O-ring. You'll notice that inside the lid on the underside there is a square O-ring in a groove, and this O-ring needs to be cleaned on a weekly basis. It can be popped out of here and wiped with a dry cloth, and the groove wiped as well. So next, just set the lid down on top of a jar and thread it onto the jar. It's important that once it feels like it's initially snug, at this point right here, it's important to go ahead and give it another 3/8 of an inch to compress that O-ring that we showed you in the lid, and that'll make you a real good seal. Okay, next we're going to take a look inside the unit briefly, just get familiar with the parts on the inside. This is the wand, this plastic piece. This is the nozzle of the unit, the tip. This swing arm here guides the wand assembly into cutting position and then through its program cycle, and then returns the arm back to the part position after each cycle. I have the power off right now so that I could move the arm. I'm going to turn the power on back now, and you're going to see the unit recalibrating its home position. This is the spindle or turntable assembly. You'll notice these two index pins sticking upward from the turntable, and you'll notice there are mating holes on the chuck. The chuck is placed over those pins, and you just drop it down there, and gravity holds the chuck in place. Okay. Next, you'll notice the slot along the right-hand side interior of the cabinet. This is a clean-out trap for the unit. The paintbrush that comes with the unit can be used to sweep the bead debris and investment debris into that slot, and it will be collected in the drawer below for Next, we're going to take a look at the investment mold checks. These screws on the bottom portion of the upright arms are the where the investment mold rests when it's placed on the chuck. It forms a little platform. The thumb screws on the side, you can adjust the concentricity of the investment mold in there. You want to make sure that you run those, take a typical ring and run those up till they just touch the ring, and then back those off about 3/4 of a turn, because you don't want those to be tightly held onto the investment mold, because if you're placing a hot ring in the chuck, you want it to be just basically a slip fit, and also no two rings are totally identical, so you want just a little bit of play. Okay, next I'm going to place the 200-gram chuck onto the spindle index pins. You notice how it seats firmly on the turntable, nice and flat. And I'm going to place the investment mold, 200-gram investment mold, into the chuck. And then with the power turned off of the unit so that I can freely swing the wand, I'm going to bring the wand over the top of the investment mold, and I'm going to verify the gap between the end of the tip and the top of the investment mold. Depending upon how much you trim your rings, you need to verify this gap. This gap is important because the degree of gap can affect the depth of cut and also the possibilities for artifacting. And by that I mean slight partitions between the various tracks of the cut, and if the gap is too close, say closer than 1/8 of an inch, you will get the partition effect between the tracks. If the gap is too wide or too high, the wand is too high above the ring, you will get this outer wall will be damaged and also affect the smoothness of the cut inside. As time goes on, you will gain experience and a feel for the two extremes, and you can adjust the gap with this thumb screw. You simply raise the wand up and down and retighten the thumb screw,